I am Maureen. That night began like any other, or at least I thought it would. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every small sound, the ticking of the old clock in the living room, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the soft creaks of the floorboards. I had just finished helping my mother tidy up the living room and was ready to go to my room and read a book before sleep. But everything changed when he appeared in the doorway, his shadow stretching long and dark under the dim light of the hallway. My stepfather's presence had always made me uneasy. Not because he was cruel or violent, but because there was always something in his eyes that made me second-guess myself, something I could never quite name. That night, it was the way he stood, leaning slightly on the doorframe, his gaze fixed on me, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. "Maureen," he said softly, almost too casual for the way my heart had suddenly started racing. "Can you do something for me tonight?" I paused, unsure. He rarely asked for anything, and when he did, it often meant trouble. I forced a smile and said, "Sure, what is it?" He stepped into the hallway, and I noticed the way his shoes scraped lightly against the tiles. "I'm hungry," he said, and then he paused as if considering his next words carefully. "I want you to cook for me." I blinked. Cook for him? That didn't seem like such a big deal at first. I had cooked for the family before, simple meals, nothing fancy, but there was something in the tone of his voice that made my stomach twist in knots. It was not a polite request, it was commanding, almost like a test. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay. What would you like me to cook?" He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was sharp, a little too controlled. "Whatever you think you can make well. I trust you to surprise me." I swallowed hard. Surprising him could be dangerous, I realized. I didn't want to mess this up. My hands trembled slightly as I moved toward the kitchen. The house felt smaller now, more suffocating. Every creak of the walls, every shadow seemed to watch me. As I started gathering ingredients, I thought about how our lives had changed since he came into the picture. My mother had remarried a few years ago after my father died, and at first, I had tried to accept him. I wanted to, really. But there was always a distance, a tension I couldn't ignore. He was polite most of the time, sometimes even charming, but there were moments like this night when I felt trapped under his gaze, as if he held some invisible power over me. I set the stove to warm and began chopping vegetables. The rhythmic sound of the knife hitting the cutting board helped calm me slightly, but only for a few minutes. Every so often, I would glance toward the hallway, half expecting him to step in and watch me cook. "You know," he said suddenly, breaking the silence, "cooking is a skill every woman should master. It's about more than just feeding people. It's about care, attention, and understanding." I nodded politely, trying to hide the shiver that ran down my spine. His words seemed innocent, even educational, but there was an edge to them that made me uneasy. I continued chopping, trying to focus on the carrots and onions rather than the strange tension that hung in the room. As I moved to stir the pot, he walked into the kitchen, leaning casually against the counter. I tried to act natural, though I could feel my cheeks heat up. "Smells good," he said, sniffing the air like a judge in a competition. "Thank you," I replied softly, unsure of what else to say. I felt like a child caught in a storm, trying to do the right thing but never quite sure what the storm wanted. For a while, I worked in silence. He didn't speak, and the quiet settled over the room like a thick blanket. But then, just as I was about to put the vegetables into the boiling water, he spoke again. "Do you enjoy cooking, Maureen?" His voice was calm, almost casual, but I could sense a deeper meaning behind the question. I like it," I said hesitantly. "Sometimes it helps me think." He nodded slowly, his eyes following every movement of my hands. "Good. It's important to be good at something. You never know when it might matter." I wasn't sure what he meant. The words sounded like advice, but the way he looked at me made my stomach churn. I focused on my task, chopping and stirring, trying to block out the feeling of being watched so closely. The kitchen grew warmer as the stove hissed and steamed, and the aroma of sautéing vegetables filled the small room, curling into every corner like it wanted to claim the space. For a moment, I allowed myself to think I could relax, telling myself that perhaps this request wasn't as strange as it first seemed. After all, Cooking for someone wasn't unusual. But the way he leaned against the counter, his eyes following my every movement, made it impossible to ignore the tension threading through the air. It was subtle, yet unmistakable, like the calm before a storm. I chopped, stirred, and plated each ingredient with meticulous care, my mind split between focus and unease. The knife clicked against the cutting board, the pan sizzled with each toss of vegetables, and the clock ticked loudly in the background, marking time that felt both endless and fleeting. Every glance his way sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't speak, but the silence was heavy, filled with unspoken observation, as if he were weighing each gesture, each careful motion I made. Finally, I set the steaming plate on the small dining table, my hands trembling just enough to betray my nervousness. He didn't move immediately. Instead, he lingered, his gaze scanning the spread before him. I held my breath, waiting, willing him to break the quiet. At last, he picked up a fork and tasted the food. Time seemed to stretch as he chewed, slow, deliberate, as though each bite carried a hidden meaning. "This is good," he said after a moment, his voice calm but carrying a subtle note of satisfaction. "Better than I expected." A wave of relief washed over me, warm but fragile. I exhaled softly, but the feeling was fleeting. There was something in his expression, a small twitch in the corner of his mouth, a shadow in his eyes, that kept the unease alive, gnawing at the edges of my relief. It was a smile, yes, but one that didn't reach the depths of his gaze. He continued to eat slowly, almost ceremoniously, commenting occasionally on the texture of the food, the seasoning, the way the flavors balanced. Each word felt carefully measured, precise, polite, yet somehow layered, like he wasn't just judging the meal, but me as well. My fingers fidgeted in my lap, betraying the calm I tried to project. Every subtle glance, every small pause he took, made my heart race a little faster. When he finally pushed his plate aside and leaned back, there was a weight in the way he sat that I couldn't quite place. "You did well tonight, Maureen," he said, low and deliberate, as if each word had been chosen with care. "I appreciate it." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. Pride and relief wrestled uneasily with tension and suspicion inside me. I wanted to smile, to feel the quiet satisfaction of a job done well, but that lingering shadow in his gaze made the effort hollow. After dinner, he left the kitchen without another word, the soft click of the door echoing in the quiet room. I was left alone with the lingering scent of cooked vegetables, the faint hum of the stove cooling, and the echo of his presence that seemed to linger like a weight on my shoulders. I cleaned in silence, my thoughts spinning like a storm. Why had he asked me to cook for him tonight? Why had it felt so intense, almost like a test I didn't know I was taking? That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something had shifted. The room was dark, yet the memory of his eyes and his quiet assessment clung to me. It had seemed like a simple request, a simple meal, but the way he had watched, the way he had spoken, had left an impression I could not ignore. Deep down, I realized this night would mark a change. Something between us had altered, subtly yet irrevocably, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that nothing would ever feel the same again.